The morning sun painted the Dakota plains in shades of gold and amber, as Walking Bear adjusted his grip on his bow. The young Lakota warrior had been tracking the elk herd for 3 days, moving silently through the tall grass that swayed like ocean waves in the prairie wind. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. "Patience, grandson. The hunt teaches us more than just how to find food." Walking Bear crouched behind a cluster of sagebrush, watching the massive bull elk graze peacefully near the creek. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The animal was perfect, its antlers spread wide like the branches of an ancient oak tree. The meat would feed his family for weeks, and the hide would make warm clothing for the coming winter. He drew his bowstring back slowly, feeling the familiar tension in his muscles. The elk stood broadside, offering a clear shot to its heart. Walking Bear held his breath, steadying his aim. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. That's when he noticed the silence. The birds had stopped singing. The wind had died down to nothing. Even the creek seemed to flow more quietly. Something was wrong, but Walking Bear couldn't figure out what. His instincts, honed by years of hunting on the plains, screamed danger. But from where? The elk lifted its head suddenly, ears twitching. It sensed something, too. Walking Bear's finger hesitated on the bowstring. His grandfather had always taught him to listen to the prairie's warnings, but this felt different. The silence wasn't natural. A shadow moved in his peripheral vision. Walking Bear's eyes darted to the left without moving his head. There, crouched in the grass not 50 yards away, was another hunter. The stranger wore different clothing, his hair styled in a way Walking Bear didn't recognize. This was not a Lakota warrior. The unknown hunter also had his bow drawn, but he wasn't aiming at the elk. His arrow was pointed directly at Walking Bear's chest. The young Lakota's blood ran cold. He had walked straight into a trap, focused so intently on his prey that he had missed the real predator. Walking Bear's mind raced. If he moved to defend himself, the stranger might release his arrow. If he stayed still, he was equally vulnerable. The elk, still unaware of both hunters, continued to graze peacefully. The irony wasn't lost on Walking Bear. He had been so focused on hunting that he had become the hunted. The stranger's eyes met his across the grassland. There was no hatred there, no anger, just the calm, patient look of an experienced warrior who had gained the advantage. Walking Bear recognized that look. He had seen it in the eyes of his own war chiefs during training. This was a test, and he was failing it badly. Minutes passed like hours. The sun climbed higher, and sweat began to bead on Walking Bear's forehead. His arms ached from holding the bowstring taut, but he dared not lower his weapon. The elk finally moved away from the creek, disappearing into a grove of cottonwood trees. With it went Walking Bear's chance for a successful hunt. But something told him that this encounter was about to teach him something far more valuable than any elk could provide. The stranger still hadn't moved, still hadn't fired his arrow. He seemed to be waiting for something, waiting for Walking Bear to understand something that remained hidden from him. The young Lakota warrior realized that his next decision might be the most important of his life. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, ready to snap at any moment. Whatever lesson the prairie was trying to teach him, he was about to learn it the hard way. Walking Bear's shoulders burned with the strain of holding his bow drawn, but he refused to show weakness. The mysterious hunter across the grassland remained motionless as a stone carving, his arrow still aimed with deadly precision. The young Lakota had never been in a situation like this before. All his training had prepared him to fight enemies in open battle, not to face an opponent who seemed content to wait forever. The stranger's clothing told a story Walking Bear was only beginning to read. The cut of his buckskin shirt was different from Lakota style, with patterns he didn't recognize. His moccasins were decorated with small shells that caught the sunlight. Most telling of all, his hair was held back with a red cloth band that marked him as Apache. Walking Bear had heard stories about these desert warriors, but he had never met one face to face. What was an Apache doing so far north on Lakota hunting grounds? The tribes had no quarrel with each other, separated as they were by hundreds of miles of prairie and mountain. Yet here was this warrior, clearly skilled and dangerous, treating Walking Bear like an enemy. Or was he? The Apache hunter's expression was unreadable, his dark eyes revealing nothing of his intentions. He could have released his arrow minutes ago, ending the standoff before it began. Instead, he waited with the patience of a mountain cat watching its prey. There was something deliberate about his stillness. as if he was trying to communicate without words. Walking Bear tried to remember everything his grandfather had taught him about reading an enemy's intentions. The old man always said that a warrior's eyes revealed his spirit, but the Apache's gaze was like looking into deep water. Patient, calm, and mysteriously deep. No anger burned there, no bloodlust or hatred. If anything, there was something that looked almost like amusement. A bead of sweat rolled down Walking Bear's face, stinging his eye. He blinked instinctively, and in that brief moment of blindness, panic flashed through him. When his vision cleared, the Apache was still there, unmoved. But something had changed. The corner of the stranger's mouth curved upward in what might have been the beginning of a smile. The Apache slowly shook his head, a gesture so small that Walking Bear almost missed it. Then the desert warrior did something completely unexpected. He relaxed his bowstring and lowered his weapon, though he remained crouched and ready to spring back into action at a moment's notice. Walking Bear felt confusion wash over him like a cold river. Was this surrender? A trick? An invitation to lower his own guard so the Apache could strike? His grandfather's voice whispered in his memory. When you don't understand your enemy's actions, look for the lesson he's trying to teach you. The Apache raised his left hand slowly, palm facing forward in the universal sign of peace. His bow remained in his right hand. Arrow still nocked but pointed toward the ground. He was offering a truce but keeping his weapon ready. Smart. Walking Bear could respect that kind of caution. But the young Lakota wasn't ready to trust so easily. He kept his bow drawn, though his arms screamed for relief. The Apache seemed to understand his reluctance. The desert warrior pointed with his chin toward something behind Walking Bear, then made a subtle gesture with his fingers. The meaning was clear. Look behind you, but do it carefully. Every instinct told Walking Bear not to take his eyes off his opponent, but something in the Apache's manner suggested this wasn't deception. Moving with extreme care, Walking Bear turned his head just enough to glance over his shoulder. What he saw made his blood freeze in his veins. 3 more Apache warriors emerged from concealment in the grass behind him, their own bows drawn and ready. They had been there all along, invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. Walking Bear realized with growing horror that he had been surrounded from the moment he began stalking the elk. He had walked into a trap so perfectly laid that he never saw it coming. The first Apache made another gesture, this one more complex. He pointed to Walking Bear, then to himself, then made a circular motion that encompassed all the hidden warriors. Finally, he held up one finger and pointed to the sky. The message was becoming clear. You are outnumbered, but we could have ended this at any time. We chose not to. Why? Walking Bear's mind raced as he tried to understand what was happening. This wasn't a battle or an ambush. It was something else entirely. The Apache warriors weren't trying to kill him. They were trying to teach him something. But what? Walking Bear finally lowered his bow, his arms trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The Apache warriors around him remained alert, but didn't draw their weapons any tighter. The lead Apache, the one who had been facing him in the standoff, slowly stood up from his crouch. He was older than Walking Bear had first thought, with silver streaking his black hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting against the desert sun. The Apache warrior spoke for the first time, his voice carrying easily across the grassland despite its quiet tone. You hunt well, young Lakota. Your feet are silent, your approach patient, but you see only what is in front of you. Walking Bear felt heat rise in his cheeks at the gentle criticism. I tracked that elk for 3 days. I know these hunting grounds better than anyone in my tribe. Knowing the land and seeing the land are different things, the Apache replied, walking closer with his hands visible and empty. You followed the elk's trail, but you missed ours. You watched the sky for weather signs, but you didn't notice the birds fleeing our presence. You studied your prey, but you forgot that other hunters might be studying you. The words stung because they were true. Walking Bear had been so focused on proving himself as a hunter that he had ignored the most basic rule of survival. Always know what's around you. His grandfather would be disappointed, and Walking Bear felt that shame more keenly than any physical wound. Why didn't you kill me when you had the chance? Walking Bear asked, genuinely puzzled. Your people and mine have no quarrel, but we are strangers to each other. You could have taken my scalp and my weapons. The Apache smiled, and his weathered face transformed completely. Because, young warrior, you reminded me of myself 20 winters ago. I too was so eager to prove my hunting skills that I walked into an ambush. Except in my case, it was a Comanche war party, and they were not as patient as we have been with you." He gestured to his companions, who were beginning to emerge from their hiding places in the grass. "These are my hunting brothers. We came north following a herd of buffalo that wandered far from their usual paths. We have been watching you track the elk, curious to see how the Lakota hunt in their homeland." Walking Bear looked around at the Apache warriors, seeing them clearly for the first time. They were all older than him, all bearing the scars and weathered features of experienced fighters. Yet their eyes held no menace, only the kind of patient wisdom that comes from surviving many seasons of danger. "You could have taken the elk yourself," Walking Bear observed. "You were in position long before I arrived. We hunt buffalo, not elk. The elk is your prey, in your territory. We only wanted to see if you would notice us before you struck." The lead Apache shook his head with something that might have been regret. "You did not. Even now, with all of us standing in plain sight, you still have not truly seen us." Confusion clouded Walking Bear's thoughts. "I see you perfectly well. 4 Apache warriors armed with bows and knives far from your desert homeland. Look again," the Apache said patiently. "This time, see with more than your eyes." Walking Bear studied the group more carefully, trying to understand what he was missing. The Apache warriors stood relaxed but ready, their weapons lowered but not set aside. Their clothing was travel-worn, suggesting they had been on the trail for many days. But there was something else, something he couldn't quite grasp. Then it hit him like a physical blow. One of the Apache warriors was a woman. She had been standing slightly behind and to the left of the others, her long hair braided back and partially hidden under a hunting cap. Her clothing was cut to disguise her form, and she had remained silent throughout the encounter. But now that he really looked, Walking Bear could see the truth. The Apache had brought a female warrior on their hunting expedition, something that would be unthinkable in most Lakota war parties. "Now you begin to see," the lead Apache said approvingly. "Swift Deer is one of our finest trackers. She was the one who spotted you first, 3 hours before you found the elk. She could have put an arrow in your back while you were still following the deer trail." The woman called Swift Deer stepped forward, and Walking Bear saw that she was roughly his own age, with keen eyes that missed nothing. "You move well for someone who sees so little," she said, and Walking Bear detected a hint of humor in her voice. "But if you wish to survive as a hunter, you must learn to hunt with all your senses, not just your eyes." Walking Bear felt his world shifting around him like sand in a windstorm. Everything he thought he knew about hunting, about awareness, about survival, was being challenged by these strangers from the desert. And the most unsettling part was that they were right. Swift Deer moved through the grass with a grace that made Walking Bear feel clumsy by comparison. She gestured for him to follow as she tracked back along the path he had taken to reach the elk. "Show me where you first picked up the elk's trail," she said. Walking Bear led them to a muddy patch near a small stream where the elk's hoof prints were clearly visible. He pointed proudly to the deep impressions in the soft earth. "I found these tracks at dawn yesterday. The size told me it was a mature bull, and the depth showed he was well-fed and strong." "Good," Swift Deer acknowledged. "You read the elk's story correctly. But what else do you see in this mud?" Walking Bear knelt and examined the ground more carefully. Apart from the elk tracks, he could see the small prints of a rabbit, some bird tracks he couldn't identify, and the paw prints of what looked like a coyote. "Just the usual forest animals," he said, standing up. Swift Deer pointed to a depression in the mud that Walking Bear had overlooked. "This print is human. Small and narrow, probably a woman or a young person. The heel digs deeper than the toe, which means whoever made it was carrying a heavy load. And see how the edges are sharp? This track is only a few hours old." Walking Bear stared at the print in amazement. Now that it had been pointed out, he could see it clearly. But he had walked right past it twice without noticing. "How do you see so much in one footprint?" "Because every mark in the earth tells a story," the lead Apache warrior said, joining them by the stream. Swift Deer's teacher showed her how to read these stories when she was still a child. "Among our people, we believe that the desert teaches patience, but it also teaches observation. In the desert, missing a sign can mean death." Swift Deer knelt beside another track, this one barely visible in the harder ground away from the stream. "This is where one of our hunters stepped yesterday when we first found your trail." "Can you see it?" Walking Bear looked hard but could only make out a slight disturbance in the dirt that could have been caused by anything. "I see nothing that looks like a footprint." Then you are looking with Lakota eyes in Apache territory, Swift Deer said with a slight smile. Your planes teach you to see movement across long distances, to spot enemies on the horizon. Our desert teaches us to see the smallest details up close, because water and shelter hide in tiny signs that others miss. The oldest Apache warrior approached them, his weathered face serious. This is why we revealed ourselves to you, young Lakota. You have the makings of a great hunter, but you hunt with only half your abilities. Your people have skills we Apache respect, but you could learn from our ways as well. Walking Bear felt a mix of excitement and embarrassment. These strangers were offering to teach him techniques that could make him a better hunter than anyone in his tribe. But accepting their help felt like admitting that his Lakota training was incomplete. Why would you share your secrets with me? He asked. What do you gain from teaching a stranger? Swift Deer and the lead Apache exchanged a look that spoke of long familiarity. Because, she said, the best hunters learn from everyone they meet. We have spent 2 days watching you track that elk, and we learned things about plains hunting that we never knew before. Your patience with the herd's movements taught us new techniques we can use when we return to the desert. Teaching and learning are the same thing, the older Apache added. When we show you how to read the small signs, we also learn how you read the large ones. Both of us become better hunters. Walking Bear thought about his grandfather's words about learning from every experience. Perhaps this was what the old man had meant. The best lessons came from the most unexpected places. Show me, Walking Bear said simply. For the next 2 hours, the Apache warriors guided Walking Bear through the grassland around the creek, teaching him to see signs that he had never noticed before. They showed him how the grass bent differently when different animals passed through it, how to tell the age of scat by its color and texture, and how to read the story written in disturbed pebbles and bent twigs. Swift Deer taught him to feel the vibrations in the ground that could tell him if large animals were moving nearby, even if they were out of sight. The older Apache showed him how to test the wind not just for scent, but for the tiny changes that could warn of approaching weather or hidden water sources. Most importantly, they taught him to see the forest as a living web of connections, where every plant and animal left traces of its passage for those who knew how to read them. By the time the sun reached its highest point, Walking Bear felt as if he were seeing the world for the first time. Now, said the lead Apache, let us find your elk again, but this time we hunt together. Using his newly awakened senses, Walking Bear found the elk's trail again within minutes. What had taken him hours to track before now seemed as clear as a well-worn path. The Apache warriors followed silently as he pointed out the signs he was now able to read. A tuft of elk hair caught on a thorny bush, the distinctive scent marking where the bull had rubbed against a tree, and the subtle way the grass lay flattened in the direction of the animal's movement. He's moving toward the river bend, Walking Bear said confidently. There's a meadow there where the grass grows thick and sweet. If I was an elk, that's where I'd spend the hot part of the day. Swift Deer nodded approvingly. You learn quickly, but remember, now that you can track the elk more easily, you must also watch for other signs. What else lives in this area that might interfere with your hunt? Walking Bear paused and really looked at the landscape around them. Using the techniques the Apache had taught him, he began to notice things he had completely missed before. Bear claw marks on a cottonwood tree, though they looked old. The distinct rounded prints of a mountain cat in a patch of soft earth near the river. Most concerning of all, the sharp tracks of wolves, and these were fresh. There's a wolf pack nearby, he said, feeling a chill of concern. They might be tracking the same elk. Very good, the older Apache said. What else? Walking Bear studied the ground more carefully, applying everything he had learned in the past few hours. There, partially hidden under fallen leaves, he found tracks that made his heart race. Human footprints, but not Apache or Lakota. The moccasin pattern was different from either tribe, with a distinctive beadwork pattern pressed into the sole. Crow warriors, he breathed. At least 3 of them, maybe 4, and they're moving in the same direction as the elk. The Apache warriors tensed, their relaxed demeanor shifting instantly to alert readiness. The Crow were known to raid this far south, and they had no love for either Apache or Lakota hunters on what they considered their traditional hunting grounds. How old are these tracks? The lead Apache asked quietly. Walking Bear examined the prints carefully, using the techniques Swift Deer had shown him. The edges were still sharp, and when he pressed his finger into the earth nearby, the soil had the same firmness. Very recent. Maybe an hour, possibly less. Swift Deer moved to a higher patch of ground and scanned the terrain ahead. If the Crow are hunting the same elk, we may be walking into more than we bargained for. Crow warriors are not known for sharing their prey peacefully. Walking Bear felt his excitement about the hunt mixing with a new kind of tension. This was no longer just about tracking an elk. It was becoming a complex situation that could turn dangerous quickly. 4 Apache warriors and 1 Lakota hunter against an unknown number of Crow was not good odds, especially so far from help. "We could turn back," Walking Bear suggested, though the words felt bitter in his mouth. "Find different prey." The older Apache shook his head. "Running from the Crow would solve nothing. They are in Lakota territory, which means they are either hunting or scouting for a larger raid. Either way, you need to know what they are doing here. Besides," Swift Deer added with a grim smile, "that elk has been leading us all on quite a chase. It would be a shame to let the Crow claim it now." They moved forward more cautiously, using every bit of cover the grassland provided. The Apache warriors seemed to melt into the landscape, becoming nearly invisible even to Walking Bear's newly trained eyes. He did his best to copy their movements, staying low and moving only when the wind stirred the grass enough to mask any sound. As they approached the river bend, the sound of voices carried on the breeze. Walking Bear's heart sank as he recognized the guttural tone of the Crow language. The rival hunters had found the elk first. Through a gap in the cottonwood trees, they could see the meadow where the elk grazed peacefully, unaware of the hunters closing in from multiple directions. The Crow warriors were positioned on the far side of the clearing, their bows ready and their movements coordinated like a pack of wolves. But something was wrong with their formation. Even with his limited experience in warfare, Walking Bear could see that they were positioned to drive the elk toward the Apache and Lakota position, not to take it themselves. "It didn't make sense unless it's a trap," Swift Deer whispered, reading his thoughts. "They know we're here. They're using the elk as bait." The older Apache cursed softly in his own language. "How many do you count?" "I see 4, Walking Bear replied. "But there could be more hidden in the trees." "There are," the lead Apache said grimly. "I can smell their war paint on the wind. At least 6, possibly 8. They've been planning this ambush for hours." Walking Bear realized with growing dread that the Crow had been tracking his party, just as the Apache had been tracking him. The hunters had become the hunted, and now they were caught in the middle of a trap with an innocent elk as the unwitting bait. The tension in the meadow was thick enough to cut with a knife. Walking Bear crouched behind a fallen log, his bow ready but his mind racing. Everything had happened so fast that he felt like he was drowning in possibilities and dangers. The Apache warriors around him remained calm, but he could sense their readiness for violence. Then Swift Deer did something completely unexpected. She stood up slowly, her hands empty and visible, and walked into the clearing. "Wait," Walking Bear hissed, but the older Apache warrior placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Watch and learn," the man whispered. "Swift Deer sees something we do not." The young Apache woman walked steadily toward the elk, which raised its head to watch her approach but didn't flee. Her movements were so smooth and natural that she seemed to pose no threat. When she was halfway across the meadow, she began to sing. It was a song unlike anything Walking Bear had ever heard. The melody was ancient and haunting, rising and falling like the wind across the desert. Though he didn't understand the Apache words, the meaning was clear. This was a song of respect, a hunter's prayer to the spirit of the prey. The elk stood perfectly still, as if enchanted by the music. Even the hidden Crow warriors seemed frozen by the unexpected development. Swift Deer continued her approach, still singing, until she was close enough to touch the magnificent animal. Then she did something that made Walking Bear's jaw drop. Instead of drawing a weapon, she reached into her pouch and pulled out a handful of sacred corn pollen. She sprinkled it in a circle around the elk while continuing her song, marking the animal as protected by Apache ritual. The lead Crow warrior emerged from his hiding place, his face dark with anger. "What trickery is this, Apache? We claim this elk by right of first position." Swift Deer finished her song and turned to face the Crow. "No one claims this elk, Crow warrior. It has been marked as sacred, a gift to the spirits for the lesson it has taught us all today." "What lesson?" the Crow demanded. But Walking Bear could see uncertainty in his eyes. "The lesson that the hunt is not always about the killing," Swift Deer replied calmly. "Sometimes the prey teaches the hunter something more valuable than meat. Walking Bear found himself rising from his hiding place, finally understanding what the Apache woman was doing. The other Apache warriors emerged as well, their weapons lowered but ready. Slowly, the remaining crow hunters revealed themselves, surrounding the meadow but no longer in attack formation. "This elk led all of us here for a reason," Walking Bear said, his voice carrying across the clearing. Apache, Lakota, and Crow all following the same trail. "Maybe the spirits wanted us to meet?" The Crow leader laughed harshly. "Pretty words, Lakota, but they don't fill empty bellies or provide winter robes." "Neither does starting a war in someone else's territory," the older Apache pointed out mildly. "You are far from Crowlands, hunting on grounds that belong to neither of our peoples." Swift Deer stepped forward, placing herself between the potential combatants. "I propose something different. This elk has served its purpose by bringing us together. Let it go free and let each of our hunting parties share what we have learned from tracking it." Walking Bear held his breath. What she was suggesting was almost unthinkable. Rival tribes didn't share hunting knowledge. They fought over territory and prey. But as he looked around the meadow at the faces of the other hunters, he saw something unexpected in their eyes. Curiosity. The Crow leader was silent for a long moment, studying Swift Deer with new respect. "You would give up your prey to avoid bloodshed?" "I would give up one elk to gain the knowledge of 3 tribes, she replied. "Which do you think is more valuable?" One of the younger Crow warriors stepped forward. "She speaks wisdom, Blackhawk. We came here to hunt, not to fight Apache and Lakota together." Blackhawk considered this, his eyes moving from the Apache to Walking Bear and back to the elk, which still stood calmly in the center of the meadow. "And what would each tribe offer in this exchange of knowledge?" The older Apache smiled. "We could show you how we track prey across desert stone, where most hunters see nothing. We Lakota know the migration patterns of the great buffalo herds," Walking Bear added, surprising himself with his boldness. "Knowledge that could help hunters from any tribe." Blackhawk looked at his own warriors, then back at the elk. "And we Crow know the secret paths through the mountains, and which valleys hold game when the plains are empty." For a moment, the meadow was silent except for the gentle sound of the elk pulling grass and the whisper of wind through the cottonwood leaves. Then Blackhawk did something that would be talked about around campfires for generations to come. He laid down his bow and walked toward the elk. Following Swift Deer's example, he began to sing a crow hunting song, his deep voice blending with the sound of running water. One by one, the other hunters joined in, each adding their tribe's melody to create something entirely new. The elk listened to this strange chorus for a moment longer, then turned and walked calmly into the trees, disappearing like a spirit returning to the world beyond. But the real magic wasn't in the elk's departure. It was in the sight of 3 enemy tribes standing together in peace, sharing the wisdom that had brought them to this place. Walking Bear realized that his grandfather had been right all along. The hunt had taught him something far more valuable than how to track game. It had shown him that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from taking what you want, but from understanding what you truly need. As the sun began to set over the prairie, the hunters from 3 tribes sat together by the creek, sharing stories and knowledge that would make them all better at their craft. And somewhere in the distance, a magnificent elk grazed peacefully, having completed its role as teacher in a lesson none of them would ever forget.